Welcome to Reading Book. You are listening to A Cup of Tea by Katherine Mansfield. Let's begin. Rosemary Fell was not exactly beautiful. No, you couldn't have called her beautiful. Pretty? Well, if you took her to pieces, but why be so cruel as to take anyone to pieces? She was young, brilliant, extremely modern, exquisitely well dressed, amazingly well read in the newest of the new books, and her parties were the most delicious mixture of the really important people and artists. Quaint creatures, discoveries of hers, some of them too terrifying for words, but others quite presentable and amusing. Rosemary had been married 2 years. She had a duck of a boy. No, not Peter, Michael. And her husband absolutely adored her. They were rich, really rich, not just comfortably well off, which is odious and stuffy and sounds like one's grandparents. But if Rosemary wanted to shop, she would go to Paris as you and I would go to Bond Street. If she wanted to buy flowers, the car pulled up at the perfect shop in Regent Street, and Rosemary inside the shop just gazed in her dazzled, rather exotic way and said, "I want those, and those, and those. Give me 4 bunches of those, and that jar of roses. Yes, I'll have it all the roses in the jar. No, no lilac. It's got no shape." The attendant bowed and put the lilac out of sight, as though this was only too true. Lilac was dreadfully shapeless. "Give me those stumpy little tulips, those red and white ones." And she was followed to the car by a thin shop girl, stuttering under an immense white paper armful that looked like a baby in long clothes. One winter afternoon, she had been buying something in a little antique shop in Curzon Street. It was a shop she liked. For one thing, one usually had it to oneself. The man who kept it was ridiculously fond of serving her. She beamed whenever she came in. He was so gratified he could scarcely speak. Flattery, of course. All the same, there was something. "You see, madame," he would explain in his slow, respectful tones, "I love my things. I would rather not part with them than sell them to someone who does not appreciate them, who has not the fine feeling which is so rare." And, breathing deeply, he unrolled a tiny square of blue velvet and pressed it on the glass counter with his pale fingertips. Today, it was a little box. He had been keeping it for her. He had shown it to nobody as yet. An exquisite little enamel box with a glaze so fine it looked as though it had been baked in cream. On the lid, a minute creature stood under a flowery tree. And a more minute creature still had her arms around his neck. Her hat, really no bigger than a geranium petal, hung from a branch. It had green ribbons, and there was a pink cloud like a watchful cherub floating above their heads. Rosemary took her hands out of her long gloves. She always took off her gloves to examine such things. Yes, she liked it very much. She loved it, It was a great duck. She must have it, and, turning the creamy box, opening and shutting it, she couldn't help noticing how charming her arms were against the blue velvet. The shopman, in some dim cavern of his mind, may have dared to think so too, for he took a pencil, leant over the counter, and his pale bloodless fingers crept timidly towards those rosy, flashing ones, as he murmured gently, "If I may venture to point out to Madame the flowers on the little ladies' bodies." Charming! Rosemary admired the flowers, but what was the price? For a moment, the shopman did not seem to hear. Then a murmur reached her. 28 guineas, Madame." 28 guineas. Rosemary gave no sign. She laid the little box down. She buttoned her gloves again. 28 guineas. Even if one is rich. She looked vague. She stared at the plump tea kettle like a plump hen above the shopman's head, and her voice was dreamy as she answered, "Well, give it for me, will you? I'll—" But the shopman had already bowed, as though keeping it for her as well as any human being could ask. He would be willing, of course, to keep it for her forever. The discreet door shut with a click. She was outside on the step, gazing at the winter afternoon. Rain was falling, and with the rain, it seemed the dark came too, spinning down like ashes. There was a cold, bitter taste in the air, and the new lighted lamps looked sad. Sad were the lights in the houses opposite. Dimly, they burned as if regretting something. And people hurried by, hidden under their hateful umbrellas. Rosemary felt a strange pang. She pressed her mouth against her breast. She wished she had a little box too, to cling to. Of course, the car was there. She'd only to cross the pavement. But still, she waited. There are moments, horrible moments in life, when one emerges from shelter and looks out. And it's awful. One ought not to give way to them. One ought to go home and have an extra special tea. But at the very instant of thinking that, a young girl, thin, dark, shadowy, where had she come from? Was standing at Rosemary's elbow, and a voice like a sigh, almost like a sob, breathed, "Madame, may I speak to you a moment?" "Speak to me?" Rosemary turned. She saw a little battered creature with enormous eyes, someone quite young, no older than herself, who clutched at her coat collar with reddened hands and shivered as though she had just come out of the water. To be continued. Just keep on listening to Reading Book for more stories. Have a nice day.